Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. So excited to bring to you yet another exciting episode, this time speaking with Dr. Clare Fowler, Executive Vice President of ODR.com and the author of Rising Above Office Conflict, the lighthearted guide for the heavy-hearted employee. Dr. Clare, as I like to call her, received her doctorate on designing dispute resolution systems for small businesses. She graduated from Pepperdine University, Graduate School of Education and Organizational Leadership, and her Master's of Dispute Resolution from Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine. She's also the managing editor and with a caseload herself with Mediate.com. Mediate.com is one of the premiers of mediation and mediators that you can access for almost any kind of issue. She's an active teacher and professor. And what I'm excited particularly to bring to you is that based on her book, Rising Above Office Conflict, she's going to talk about 4 to 5 key questions. What are some of the common workplace disputes, behaviors that come up in the workplace? Another is what kinds of cultural trends or challenges fuel some of these disputes? And what about the impact on our mental health? We've certainly seen a big change in all 3 of these factors since COVID and the aftermath of transitioning back to work. And she's going to conclude with some tips for managers as well as tips for employees. So you will not want to miss this upcoming interview right now, coming in just a few more seconds. And make sure that you reach out to your friends and colleagues. Let them know that this exciting episode is here now. And if you haven't already, subscribe so that you'll always be notified of future episodes around, guess what? Decoding the Conflict Mindset. So let's stay tuned and let's welcome Dr. Clare Fowler. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, host and founder of the DCM podcast. Our goal here today is to help people think about conflict differently. Many people are afraid of conflict, and yet if we know what it's about and how to deal with it, it actually becomes quite easy to navigate through. And today we have Dr. Clare Fowler to take us on that journey exactly for the workplace. Welcome, Clare.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, great. Clare, we've had the opportunity to, we've known each other for a while, but really meet in the last year or so. And I was particularly attracted to the work that I've seen you doing, particularly your new book, Rising Above Office Conflict, and how perfectly timely in today's work world post-COVID.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun to write. I've been working on it for the last 10 years. But I'm glad that it came out when it did. I agree with you. I feel like there's a lot of issues we're facing where we need some help figuring out how to rise above office conflict.
Right, absolutely. Well, Clare, before we go there, and excuse me, I'd like to call you Dr. Clare, if I may.
Sure, or Claire, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I like to be respectful of people's titles, and particularly the education hard-earned, as I know what that's like. So, yeah. So, what sort of prompted you into this direction? I know I gave a brief overview before we opened up our interview here today, but what got you particularly into this area?
Yeah, thank you. So, growing up, it was for a long time, it was just me and my mom. And she had grown up in the very typical 1950s household where everything had to look perfect. And if there was an issue, you just swept it under the rug and you didn't talk about it. And that was the household that I grew up in, right? Everything had to look perfect and we just swept stuff under the rug. And if it was uncomfortable, we just avoided it. So then I took this peer mediation class in 3rd grade and my mind was blown. Like we could have a conversation about difficult things and disagree and still be friends with each other afterwards. And it was mind-blowing to me at the time. And it still sticks with me that even though our natural tendency might be to avoid those hard conversations, but it's a constant reminder that I need to keep going back to that, you know what, Claire, we can disagree with this person and I can have a drastically different view than that person. but still respect them and still speak to them in a respectful way and still figure out how to have a learning conversation. So I learned this stuff in third grade, but it's interesting. As decades have passed and the more I've pressed into it, the more I realized it's incredibly powerful. Just right, having that freedom to be able to say, I can disagree with you and still really like you and figure out these conflict resolution and these mediation skills that make these conversations magical.
That's amazing, to think that, you were introduced to conflict resolution in the third grade through peer mediation. But that right there tells you where the world has come. Because sort of like you, a few years older, of course, but that very typical, 1950s, everything had to be perfect. And I came from a family of 9 kids, and we didn't, they talked at each other a lot or yelled at each other a lot, but they didn't communicate with each other, and certainly not about feelings and things like that, and emotions and hurts and harms and things like that. So it's just amazing where we are today. And I know, with Kids Mediating Conflict, a program that, is thriving in Southern California, and we hope to grow it. But again, it's amazing the turnaround that can happen for kids learning effective conflict resolution early on, because otherwise, who do we learn from? And they're usually not very good at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very encouraging to see how many schools have picked up peer mediation programs. And it excites me to think about how much more emotionally mature and prepared for life a lot of these kids are when they're learning these principles at 8 years old, instead of waiting to learn them at 28 or 38, like most of us do.
Or even older.
Yeah, true.
Yes. Going back to your book and so forth, and I know we've talked a little bit about some of the things we tend to see in the workplace. What would you articulate as maybe being, 3 or 4 top common behaviors that you tend to see in the workplace?
Yeah, thank you. So, so like I said, this book came from about 10 years of experience. And as I would see different behaviors in the workplace, then I would come home, and at first, because mediation is kind of an isolating field, right? You're not working typically in a company with other people where you can debrief. So I was coming home and just journaling my reflections on different behaviors, different conflicts that I was seeing. And then I would start to journal what seemed to be a really effective strategy for working with that behavior, or what didn't work. What did I try? And I want to make sure to not do that again next time. And so some of the more common ones that I saw, we have the Hulk personality. And usually where this one comes from is a complete inability to deal with the conflict. And instead, they just try to jump over it and lay down the law. Usually this is coming from a desire for progress. They just need to see that there's progress, there's a connection being made, that something is done. And so what I found is, if we can identify that interest and help them to identify that progress is being made, I hear you, yes, we're moving forward, that kind of helps the Hulk to calm down, and it helps the real person to come out. Another common behavior that I see is what I call the quiet queen. And this is the one who is typically interested in a place of safety. And unfortunately, if it doesn't feel safe, then the quiet queen can hold on to those interests. And instead of expressing them, they might just support other people's interest, but they start to become very resentful, right? Because their interests aren't being met. And so they're gaslighting themselves. And so when I see a quiet queen, I like to have conversations with them and just help them to understand what safety looks like. And they might not be at a place where they can express what safety looks like for themselves. So I'll have them describe, maybe for your daughter or for another employee, or in an ideal world, what does a safe environment look like? And then we work backwards to figure out, how can we create that here so you can start to get those interests out and feel like you're a little bit more engaged. I'd say the third most common one that I see, and this is one that I'm really guilty of, is that busier than thou mentality. I have so much to do. I can't possibly handle one more thing. You could not understand how busy I am. I have so much more on my plate than anybody else does. I'm handling everything. And so this can come from quite a few different interests. It usually comes from a place where we need to self-protect. right? The person is feeling very overwhelmed. They're feeling like their needs aren't being met. They might not feel like they have adequate support. And so they've put up incredibly tough walls. What I try to do there is work with a person to understand what the long-term goals are. We work backward from there to identify, okay, what are the steps that we need to take along the way, and where is it that we need to bring in help? And providing that sense of organization, support, resources, and safety, it usually helps the busier than thou person to be able to say, okay, I do have a lot on my plate, but I'm not feeling like I'm sinking, right? I'm feeling like I have a plan, like I'm taking a little bit of responsibility and ownership over this. And then that's usually where they can start to reach out and have relationships with the people around them instead of just surrounding themselves with these thick walls.
Right. Yeah. And thank you for identifying those three then. And so one is just, somebody wanting to have progress forward and not get sort of daunted in the way by unresolved conflict. The other one is basically unwilling to approach it and therefore misgetting their needs met. And a host of behaviors can come from that. And then the last one just simply being too busy. And that in that way, not only does the person feel overwhelmed, but they also seem unapproachable. Say, well, I can't go talk to that person. They're too busy and they'll just blow me off anyway. So why go there?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those, because I know that there are more. In fact, in your book, you've actually identified 20 common behaviors and what to do about them, right?
Exactly. So we were talking about this earlier. So my bookshelves probably look just like yours, where I have hundreds of books, right? I did my undergrad on communication, then my master's on mediation, my doctorate on workplace mediation. And I have all these books, right? I have all ththese student loans where I bought all of these books on very advanced communication theory and dispute resolution practice. And my husband would come home from work and he'd be frustrated and venting about different things in the office. And I was looking at my bookshelf saying, all of the answers that you need are right here. And he would never read any of those books, right? They appeal to people who are already in the field. And I think that they are written for those in the field to continue to educate them. But I was so frustrated listening to his concerns, listening to my clients' concerns, because they're the people that are actually in the trenches, right? They're the ones that need this information. And I just felt like there weren't a lot of books written for them. And so all of these journals that I had been doing about different behaviors and different strategies, I essentially turned that into a book for my husband or people who are in similar situations where they're experiencing conflict at work and it's overwhelming and they just want some sense of clarity and a plan. And so I took those 20 behaviors and then I identified what's causing that behavior and what do you do about it? How do you work effectively with that behavior? Because as we all know, you can't change the people around you. You can change your reaction to them. But then what's cool is over time, a lot of that does end up changing their behavior, right? If they realize that what they were doing, those really unhealthy behaviors aren't working anymore, and they're not able to bait you like they used to be, then their behaviors start to change. So I wrote it for my husband, but I'm hoping that it can just be a tool. I call it the lighthearted guide for the heavy-hearted employee. So anybody who's going through hard stuff at work, and let's face it, most of us are, it's just a quick guidebook. So they can turn quickly to a chapter and say, oh, this is the behavior that I'm dealing with. What do I do about it?
That's great. That's great, because we really do need more, how to do and hands-on kinds of tools immediately implementable. Yeah. And to build on what you said, Claire, is that, we can't change people. And so often people are concentrating on what the other person needs to do to change rather than saying, what can I do to change? And so we can't change somebody's behavior, but we can influence change by changing how we approach things. And like you said, eventually the person does start behaving differently because you're not giving them the same trigger to keep behaving poorly.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious with this, Claire, do you see any underlying cultural shifts or factors contributing to some of these workplace conflicts you see?
Absolutely. So let's look at post-COVID. I have been hired to mediate a lot of persistent, ongoing, underlying for years microaggression disputes. And I couldn't figure out why at first. So I was meeting with managers and they're like, this has always kind of just been a discomfort, but it's been there for 10, 20 years. I don't understand why all of a sudden people are saying that they need a mediator for this. Mm-hmm. And after about the fifth time I heard this from a manager, I was like, okay, there's clearly some kind of a cultural trend going on here. What is it? And this is what I think happened. Okay. I think it was just like the frog sitting in water, and then the heat was slowly turned up. So let's say you arrive at your office, and at first everybody is so nice and wonderful and respectful. And then you experience a little slight, but you don't want to be difficult. And so you don't say anything, you just tolerate it. And then they realize that you tolerate it. So it's another slight and another slight and another disrespect, or another time where you're pushed out of an office and you continue to tolerate it. And the heat just goes up and up and up and up. And so we're sitting in this very uncomfortable pot of boiling water. And then we jumped out of the water during COVID, right? And everybody went home. And we had 2 years, which is enough time for us to be able to reset our bearings, right? For people to get grounded again and be able to say, what is it that I really want? And then the world opened back up and we all went back to the office and we jumped right in the pot of boiling water. And we went, what the heck? Why have I been sitting in a pot of boiling water? I'm not okay with this. And so all of these microaggressions that had slowly built up, given enough objectivity and perspective, people said, I actually don't want to sit in boiling water anymore. I love my job, but I'm not okay with this culture. And so I've been seeing that a lot of gender microaggressions, ageism, racism, where people have just said, I'm done. I'm done with the little slights. I'm done with those little signs of disrespect. And even if it's not incredibly overt, we're still going to deal with the root cause. And so it hasn't been as much solving surface problems lately, but it's been a lot about identifying some of those roots and almost more culture coaching.
Interesting. I really appreciate your sort of analysis there of, why has this increased now? And I agree, I've seen the same kind of thing, but hadn't really connected as far as, that absence from the workplace and allowing people to sort of reset and say, what, this is what I will tolerate, and this is what I won't tolerate. I'm no longer going to subject myself to poor behavior, poor treatment, where I don't feel valued or respected for who I am. And
and I think a lot of us were putting up with it for a long time. And I think that is one of the root causes of the mental health epidemic that we're seeing in the US, because when I think most of us are born with this inherently good sense of worldview and a good sense of self. But then when you are mistreated and you tolerate it and you start gaslighting yourself, then your core identity kind of steps back and is like, hey, Claire, I thought that you thought better about yourself. But if you're willing to be treated this way, maybe you don't think you're as great as we originally thought. And then it just starts to do this horrible number on your mental health. So I think it's wonderful that we're in a culture right now where people are saying, no, I'm not okay with that anymore. I deserve to be treated better. And I think that as people start to stand up for themselves and say, I'm not being difficult here, I'm not asking for too much, I'm just asking for simple, plain respect, I think that we're going to start to see mental health continue to improve.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for bringing that up, because I know that was one of the topics I wanted to explore. And having been a mental health professional for many, many years, right, to me, it's like, finally people are recognizing, accepting, yes, we do, emotions do precede cognitions, and we can get really messed up, if we don't deal with it. Yeah. So I love it. I love it. Yeah. One of the things, you said, is like, I deserve to be treated well. And I would suggest it's not even about deserving, but it's more about, who are you to treat me badly? I am who I am, and so, what about just mutual respect? What about common courtesy? What about, accepting each other for who we are and celebrate our uniquenesses as well as our similarities? And so to me, it's a little bit of a mind shift because sometimes people don't believe that they deserve any better. And then that's back to their childhood. And so that's a whole other cycle to work through. And so, so no, it's like, if we're coexisting in a workplace where we both have the skills, talents, and abilities to be hired here to do a job, who are you to be treating me poorly that now it's interfering with my job performance, my quality of work, and my own state of being, my well-being in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I completely agree with that. That's a good point.
And, one of the things too, I know, at least, over my many years of doing workplace mediation, I mean, all too often, I would hear managers and supervisors, well, that person's just being too sensitive. It's just a personality conflict. And it's like, again, bias, dismissive, and just a lack of recognition for, emotions affect all of us. And so what tips do you have for managers? So they won't say those blatantly disrespectful comments.
Right. So ideally we can go through some coaching and help them to weed that dismissive vocabulary out. But if they're not there yet, right? If they're not to that point of self-awareness, then I try to break it down and be very practical. Let's look at return on investment here. Are you getting what you want out of the words that you're using? And if you're trying to get a shift in behavior from your employee, then the tactic that you're utilizing is ineffective. It's shooting yourself in the foot, essentially, because the way that our brains work is they will start to change once there is a sense of, I am safe, I am whole, I'm accepted, I am seen, as opposed to if somebody, let's say, if somebody were to yell at me in the office and I feel wronged, and a boss comes out to me and says, oh, you're fine, it's okay, you just need to deal with it, you're just exaggerating, you're being a baby, then my brain is saying, but wait a minute, I have been wronged. I don't feel like I should be treated that way. And so instead of just saying, oh, okay, thanks for telling me, I didn't know I was fine, oh, I'm all better now. Instead, what happens is our brains double down. And what initially might have just been a little slight, our brains escalate to try to get more attention, because there is a part of your brain that is always crying out to say, I am important. I want to be treated well. I want somebody to acknowledge, or I hold a sense of the world that if somebody is mistreated, then that's wrong. There needs to be a sense of fairness. They need to apologize. So when I have been mistreated, if a manager can just take that simple moment to say, I'm really sorry. Sorry that you were disrespected. Sorry that that doesn't feel fair. Or I can see that this is really frustrating for you. And just give their brains a moment to say, it's true. Things didn't happen in the workplace the way they should have. And I will acknowledge that. And as soon as that's acknowledged, I feel like that's the key. And then the floodgates open up. And then all the healing and the change can start to happen. But it won't happen until there's that initial validation. Once there's that validation, then the person is able to say, thank you, I was wronged. Also, in retrospect, there are some things that I did there that kind of led to it. And now I can hear what you're saying. There are some behaviors here that I can change. But people won't get to that place of self-reflection, self-actualization, and changing their behaviors without that validation happening first.
Yeah. Oh, very important. Great description of that kind of exchange then, because again, dismissive language on the part of managers is probably the number one behavior to redirect. And like you said, acknowledgement is so huge. People just want to feel heard. And many times they don't have that forum because they're told, oh, but what you think or what you feel doesn't matter. That's, nobody else feels it. So why do you feel it?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'm just building off your ideas here and trying to, hopefully expand the minds of our listeners as far as how they view conflict, and that there are things that they can do. And so what would be a tip or two that you'd have for the employees out there listening?
Yeah, thank you. Um, so I feel like in most exchanges, what we see is this very ineffective form of communication that I call the thunder turtle syndrome. And what you have there is two people that are avoiding discussing the difficult thing, and one of them avoids it by jumping over it and laying down the law. You have to have that report on my desk by Monday at 9. And they lay down the law, they say this is the way it's going to be. And they shove their interests out on the other person. And then you have another person who reinforces that behavior by turtling and by stuffing their own interests down and just supporting the other one. And they turtle and they hide and they say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll have that report on your desk Monday at 9. And so this is a very vicious cycle, which is frustrating on both ends. So it's frustrating for the thunderer who's trying to make progress, who's trying to have a connection, who's trying to really connect with the other person. And so they try to do that by getting louder and being heard, right? And the louder that they get, the more the turtle withdraws. And this is also very frustrating for the turtle because over time it builds resentment because the turtle's ideas are not getting out there. And so, and let's be honest, we all do this at different times, right? Where you get frustrated and maybe you're hungry or you're tired or you're short on time and you just kind of lay down the law and you say, I just need it to be this way. Or maybe a conversation is so uncomfortable and you want to people please and you want to save the relationship. And so you might respond like a turtle and just say, okay, yeah, sure, whatever you want. That sounds good, right? We all do these behaviors. But the problem is that we're never actually talking about the thing. We're never addressing the conflict. Mm-hmm. So when I see this thunder turtle syndrome in workplaces, I ask them to work on a very, very simple mantra. And that is, in every conversation, it's not complete until you've had interests in and interests out. Interests in meaning, did I pause long enough to absorb the other person's interests? Did I make it a safe space so that they could communicate their interests? Did I have the patience? Did I ask questions? Did I actually pause and listen to what they were saying? So did I let interests in? And also, did I communicate my interests out? So for turtles, requires a little bit of bravery as well as self-awareness and self-analysis. So they know these are what my interests are, and I am going to express them to you. So it's a very simple little mantra, but I think it works really well because we can all remember that, right? If I'm trying to communicate with my manager or with my employees, in every conversation, my goal here is interest in, interests out. And just that reinforces such a sense of fairness and buy-in that even if we end up at a different outcome than I originally expected, because the process felt fair and because everybody feels included, that there's usually enough buy-in that people feel satisfied, right? It feels like an effective conversation.
Yeah. That's I like that thunder and turtle analogy. It's easy to see, they're thundering in,
Right.
or turtle diving down, Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. I'm curious because I know, we use the word interest all the time in mediation. Is what are the underlying interests? What would be an example of that so our listeners have some sense of what we mean by that?
Yeah. So a lot of times we just communicate our positions, which is the what. This is what I need. I need a taco. I need pizza. And we just say what we need. I need that report done Monday at 9. But this distances people because you're not actually sharing the why. So the interest is when you're willing to drop down a level and share the why behind it. Well, I need a taco because I'm hungry. I need that report on my desk Monday at 9, so I have time to review it before I have to present it to the stakeholders at 10. And when we're willing to share that interest, what we're doing is we're saying, you are important enough to see behind the curtain. You deserve that respect. You deserve to know what's going on here. And it's a sign of respect. It ties people together. It reinforces relationship. Especially when managers do it, it models that open communication. And so interest is just sharing a little bit of the why behind something.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's excellent description. Very, very explicit. So great, great. So, if people wanted to reach out to you, Claire, given your workplace organizational dynamics and the work that you do, how would they reach out to you?
So if anybody's ever thinking, how do I reach Claire at mediate.com? Well, there you go. That's my email address. So Claire at mediate.com is probably the easiest way to reach out. At mediate.com, we also do have a ton of different trainings and webinars, ongoing conversations. We have Live Talk Tuesday for new mediators. We have meetings for HR, for management, where we're just trying to have this be an ongoing conversation so that so the community doesn't feel isolated, or if people do have questions, that they feel like there's other people that are asking the same questions and a lot of people who might have already answered them. So we can start to share ideas and debrief difficult experiences. So please reach out to me, and also please reach out to us at mediate.com, because we want to have these be community conversations as much as possible.
Wonderful. So you're really taking it out into the community, not just the workplace, in terms of helping build awareness and build skills on how to better navigate through conflict, right?
Right. That's
Great.
the goal.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. And so, Claire, if there's just one tip to walk away from our conversation here today, what would you want people to know?
Thank you. So there's a lot of buzz right now in the fitness industry. You've probably heard this word, or you'll hear it soon now that we're talking about it. And it's these hope molecules. Okay. And the idea is that if you go to the gym and you see somebody lifting a 30-pound weight and you're like, oh, I could never do that, I'm just not that strong. But you keep lifting, and you start with the 15s and the 20, and you're doing good, and you eat your kale and you get your rest and you drink your water. And then one day you're able to lift the 30. So you just did something that originally your brain thought you would not be able to do, right? It sounded too hard. It sounded too scary. But then you did it and you survived. Then your brain produces these lovely hope molecules that are called myokines. And it's the only time where your brain produces these. You can't artificially produce these in your brain. It has to come from going through a hard experience that you didn't think you could. And the same thing is true with conflict. So a lot of us see conflict as, oh, it's going to be so painful. It's going to be so destructive. It's going to destroy my relationships, or it's just going to be hard. It's not worth it. But people don't realize that as we have these difficult conversations, it can actually be very, very mentally beneficial for us, because we work through these hard things and your brain goes, well, look at you. Look at you who can do hard things. I'm so proud of you. And then we start having hope. And what's neat is it also strengthens relationships, right? Relationships don't come from two people that just coexist side by side and they never have any interactions, right? Really strong relationships come from the push and the pull. And I disagreed here, but you respected that. And I reinforced a boundary, but you were okay with that. And now I feel even more respected because you've invested into me and you respected my boundaries. And that's what forms these strong relationships, is continuing to respect each other and talk through these conflicts. So I think that would be my big takeaway is, as we have differences, don't shy away from them. Instead, realize there's a lot of opportunity there, right? There's an opportunity to articulate what makes you tick and also to understand what makes the other person tick.
Yeah. Excellent tip. I love that whole concept. And so, it may be hard at first. Everything's hard at first, but we do it and then we get more confidence and we do it again and we get better at it. And pretty soon we don't even have to think about it. It's just part of who we are.
That's it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Clare Fowler, for being here today. And I just want to acknowledge for our listeners that it's CLARE as your first name. And so Claire at mediate.com. And do look into getting her book, Rising Above Office Conflict, the lighthearted guide for the heavy-hearted employee, filled with tips and techniques and ideas that can really make the workplace a different place. So here you have it. We're decoding the conflict mindset with another episode. And what a great insight you brought to us today, Claire. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Debra Dupree. I appreciated it.
Wonderful. So again, folks, Decoding the Conflict Mindset, if you haven't already, subscribe right now. so that you're in tune for the next episode coming up. And we're always here building a bigger, wider community of decoding the conflict mindset worldwide, so we can really do something different about conflict and peace moving forward. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you.
Well, I hope you gleaned a few key concepts and ideas for how to redirect challenging behavior in the workplace from Dr. Clare Fowler. And don't miss out on her book called Rising Above Office Conflict, a lighthearted guide for the heavy-hearted employee. I think at some point we probably have all dealt with difficulties in the workplace, much like Claire is talking about. And so do take note that we can make a change, we can make a difference. It's when we don't speak up and we don't do anything about it that we run into trouble. So let us know what you think of Dr. Clare Fowler's interview here on Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Pass it along and invite your other friends and colleagues to subscribe so that they are too notified of upcoming episodes that may be relevant to their situation in the workplace. And coming up next, we're going to have a special holiday season recap on our 2024 season and some special words from what? Dr. Debra Dupree, as we take a look and reflect on the past year and as we open up into 2025. We certainly have seen a roller coaster of events over the last several years, and we're sure to see some new events rolling into the new year. So don't go away. Again, mark your calendar. We're here the second Thursday of every month.